Now we move on to Celtic with this absolutely beautiful picture. This is a painting by... It doesn't say. There must be somewhere in the book where it notes what this painting is. So here, of course, is Celtic Europe. So the Celts were a tribe mostly found on the British Isles and in France and Belgium and northern Spain. But we also have some here in Thrace and modern-day Turkey. This is one of my favourite paintings. Merlin and Nimue. This is by E. Burne-Jones. It's called The Beguiling of Merlin. So the Celtic myths mostly surrounded the Knights of the Round Table, King Arthur, and some very powerful women who were thought to be witches or, I don't know, mages of some kind. You're going to recognize some of these names. I actually have quite a lot of trouble understanding how to pronounce a lot of them, because Celtic names can be very difficult for an Anglophone. I'm just going to keep moving through until I find ones I recognize. So this is Aoife. She was an Irish warrior princess. Throughout this section of the book, interestingly, there are more modern illustrations. I believe possibly because the author couldn't source quite so many artworks dedicated to Celtic figures than to classical mythology. The Western canon has had an obsession with classical mythology for a long time. This is Angus. He was the Irish god of love. Arthur, of course. It says here, undoubtedly the best known of the Celtic heroes, and I wouldn't disagree with that. He was most popular during the Middle Ages, when the exploits of his followers, the Knights of the Round Table, impressed the greater part of Western Europe. I spoke about the period of Arthur's reign, in one of my other library videos, where I talked about a book called The Mists of Avalon. It's an excellent, excellent retelling of the Arthurian sagas. Avalon was a name for the Welsh otherworld, so kind of like heaven. Banshees are such an interesting figure. So this was a woman of the fairies. Legend has it that a banshee attaches itself to a family and warns it of impending death with an eerie wail. And that's why people sometimes say screeching like a banshee. Here's a feature on Celtic otherworlds. The glittering otherworlds of Celtic myth are the invisible realms of gods and spirits, fairies, elves, and misshapen giants. Some are sparkling heavens, and some are brooding hells. The veil between the visible and the invisible is gossamer thin and easily torn. There's a few different heroes called Bran in Celtic mythology. Of course, if you're a Game of Thrones fan, you'll know that it's all Bran's fault. Bridget, the goddess of healing and fertility. This is a picture called Saint Bride, which is a reference to Bridget, Saint Bridget. Ceridwen was a Welsh goddess of fertility. Cernunnos is a horned god. He was worshipped both in southern Europe and in the British Isles. Conor Mór, the High King of Ireland. They've dedicated a bit of space to him. Here's a section on sages and seers. So seers and shamans of Celtic myth were endowed with extraordinary gifts of prophecy, wisdom and healing, and they enjoyed a profound rapport with natural forces, supernatural forces. This is an extraordinary painting. It's by G. Henry and E. A. Horned. It's called The Druids Bringing in the Mistletoe. Connell. Cormac Magat. So here we have a double page dedicated to, I have no idea how to pronounce it, I think it's Cullen or Cullen. He was the champion warrior of Ulster, and his name means the Hound of Cullen. Maybe it's Cuchulainn. The good god, Dada. He was the great god of Irish mythology. Deirdre. She was the cause of Ulster's sorrows. She seems to be another victim of the anger of a man who is romantically interested in her and who she is not interested in return. She seems to have had a pretty hard time of it, actually. Magic and enchantment. Enchantment permeates Celtic myth, shrouding the tales in a haunting, dreamlike quality. The all-pervasive otherworld lies behind much of the mystery and magic, penetrating the forests and the lakes, and crafting charmed rings and weapons. I love this one here, this painting. It's called La Belle Dame Sans Merci by H.M. Riam. So that's after a poem by Keats. La Belle Dame Sans Merci, the beautiful woman without mercy. Dylan, the Welsh sea god whose parents were Arianrhod and Gwydion. As soon as he was born, he headed straight to sea, where he immediately swam as well as a fish. Emer, It looks like Emer was the wife of Cuchulainn. Somebody tell me how to pronounce that, please, for the love of God. Eton, second wife of the god Midir. She was reincarnated several times, lucky girl. A couple of different Ferguses. The Finna, the famous band of warriors responsible for the safety of the High King of Ireland. Finn McCool, who is the leader of the Finna, also known as the Fenians. Fintan. Now, they've linked Fintan here with Noah from biblical mythology. It says here it is likely that the monks who first recorded the Irish sagas altered the original myth in order to link it with Noah's descendants because of the deluge that only Fintan managed to survive by becoming a salmon. The Firbolg, or bagmen of Irish mythology, were said to have acquired their name from a time when they were enslaved in Thrace and married to carry bags of earth. Wondrous cauldrons. Of course, we can't have witches and wizards and warlocks and giants without cauldrons. This one here is the Grail, which I guess is a kind of cauldron. Galahad, of course. He was a knight of King Arthur's at the Round Table. Gawain, same deal. It's probably where we get the name Gavin. Guinevere, or Jennifer. She was the wife of Arthur, but secretly had a love affair with Lancelot, his best knight and best friend. Oh, this is the picture from the frontispiece. Lancelot and Guinevere by Herbert Draper. Gwydion. Isolde, of the famous story Tristan and Isolde. She was an Irish princess who was in love with Tristan, but she was not married to him. She was married to King Mark. Joseph of Arimathea from the Bible is included here. He was included in Arthurian mythology because of the Grail story. Celtic romance, of course. The lively and compelling character of Celtic romance stems from the heated rivalries and passions of the lovers. Most, if not all, tales involve a love triangle, with two men contesting one desirable woman, which is not so different from some of our more modern romances like Twilight. Lancelot, who I mentioned before, one of the greatest and noblest knights in the Arthurian tales. And he was secretly getting around with his best friend's wife. Well, what do you expect? Throughout history, people who do not love each other got married all the time. Maeve, the warrior queen of Connacht. According to Irish mythology, no king could reign unless he was married to her. She was believed to hold the kingdom's sovereignty in her person. That's very progressive. Single combat. In war, the ancient Celts relied on heroic single combat rather than all-out warfare as a means of settling disputes. Well, that makes sense. Merlin, probably the most famous wizard in all of mythology. And King Arthur's half-sister Morgane le Fay, sometimes thought of as the lover of Merlin. It says, throughout all the British myths that tell of Arthur's incredible reign, Morgane le Fay is always depicted as his enemy. However, when Arthur died, she was one of the women who took his body back to Avalon. And indeed, if you read the Mists of Avalon retelling of Arthurian myths, she is portrayed with much more complex motivations. Niamh. Oisin was the son of Finn McCool, who was the Fenian I spoke about earlier. He gets quite a lot of space dedicated to him. Heroic quests, of course. We have the Grail quest, Owen, Camelot. Of course, the heroic quest has remained a very popular form of story right up until the present day. Oscar, Owen, he was one of King Arthur's warriors. This is an incredible painting, Percival. This is by Martin Wiegand. It says he was an outsider. He was brought up in a forest far from Camelot. He was brought up in a forest far from Camelot and ignorant of its courtly traditions. Rhiannon, a very popular name now, and subject of a Fleetwood Mac song. And of course, some fabulous voyages across the seas. The Holy Grail, of course. Tristan of Tristan and Isolde fame. Uther Pendragon, who was Arthur's father. And that's it for the Celtic section. I hope you have been inspired by these myths and legends and figures. And don't forget to please check out the other videos in this series for more flights of fancy of the Norse and classical persuasions. Thank you so much.